mic on? Got your mic on?
I do now.
Mic on, phone off.
Okay.
I got your mics on up down there?
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order for tonight. This is what we call a work session. It's a little bit different than a regular board meeting. It's a little bit abbreviated from standpoint of some of the reports we do and that type of thing. This meeting is designed for a work session for board members to receive, review, and discuss information prepared by staff, and also we have other people presenting. Only staff and board members are allowed to engage with the presentations without special consent. You are reminded that we do have open public comments at our regular board meeting. So unless it's something really urgent, let's kind of hold it. That would be the first Tuesday night of each month. I do want to welcome everybody for coming. Appreciate that. It's a cold night, so took a little effort to get out, and I appreciate that. The first item that we have is not really a work session item. It's just a very special thing that we do not do very often. If I have to remember, the last time we did this type of swearing in was a mayor back in 2001, I think.
Right.
So it's been a long time since we had a special oath of office. So the board 2 weeks ago nominated and approved April Sneed as commissioner that will fill my term that I vacated when I became mayor, and that term will last until the end of 2021, I believe. So we've got a special guest here tonight, that Judge Ashley Parker Dunstan. This is not your first time here, so welcome again. Good to see you again. I think District Court Judge for Wake County, is that correct? From my understanding, it's Hickory, North Carolina is where you were born. So family of you have them here. Jason and Elizabeth, is that right?
My mom and dad. This is Isaac and Ayana.
Okay.
My parents are Jason and Elizabeth.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. And I think you served as Wake County District Attorney for a while, Assistant Attorney General. I didn't know you then, and that's a good thing not to know the District Attorney in Wake County, is it not? So, but I think we did meet 2 years ago, and welcome. Appreciate that. So with that said, I'll turn it over to the clerk to do the formal oath of office.
Oh, can we congratulate Ashley? I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Also, for, what is it? You are, how many more years did you?
Oh, unopposed, so I've got 4 more years.
Yes, so congratulations.
There you go.
Thank you.
There you go.
You'll stand right here. You'll stand. All right. Well, please place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right.
Raise your right.
And then raise your right hand. And if you will repeat after me. I state your name.
I, April Sneed,
Do solemnly and sincerely swear
do solemnly and sincerely swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
and laws of the United States Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
to the best of my knowledge and ability,
to the best of my knowledge and ability,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
as Commissioner,
as Commissioner,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Made official.
Oh, her boys are here.
They turn that air conditioner on today. Huh?
You have to leave your kid.
Yeah, right?
Well, thank you again for coming, Judge. Appreciate that. Thanks. Mm-hmm.
Got a fan club. Hello. Look at that.
That's great.
Very good. We got a full board.
All right, thank you.
Yay, welcome.
Welcome. That's right. Welcome. Now the fun stuff is over. We get down to the work piece of it. We do have, I think, if my counting is right, 4 items for the workshop. Before we start those 4 items, I think the planning board was invited to attend, and I kind of want to recognize those people that's in attendance and just see if you would stand up if you are here. Mark Powells, which serves as the chair.
Oh, there he is.
Thank you for coming, Mark. Mike Moss. Appreciate it, Mike. Donnie Lawrence. I saw Donnie somewhere. Nice to see you, Donnie. Ruth Payne. Nice to see you. Frank Pierce. I didn't see Frank. I don't think he's here, is he? Jim Schwartz. Is he here? Nice to see you. And Davion Cross. I think I saw you, the new member. So, have you had your first meeting yet?
No.
You hadn't had a planning board meeting.
Not the planning board.
I think it's next week, right? Gotcha. I think it's next week. Well, welcome all of you. Are you guys okay where you at? Can see the presentation and everything? Well, good. The first one is property valuation update, I think, for Wake County. We got somebody presenting that, Marcus Kinraid, is that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct. Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I appreciate the invite. My name is Marcus Kinraid. Let me check. I'm the Wake County Tax Administrator. I might be on your list of people that you don't necessarily want to know too. I don't know. I appreciate the invite. We have completed our 2020 countywide reappraisal. We sent out the notices last week, and I'm pleased to come here and convey to you the results for Rolesville. So first, I'd just like to talk a little bit about what a reappraisal is. It's the process of updating real property values in Wake County to reflect fair market value as of January 1, 2020. It's the most probable price that a property would sell for in an open and competitive market or a hypothetical sale. There's a lot of properties in Wake County that haven't been for sale or sold for decades, but we have to estimate a hypothetical sale. The last countywide reappraisal in Wake County was effective for January 1, 2016. Prior to that, Wake County was on an 8-year reappraisal cycle, but following the 2016 project, the cycle was shortened to 4 years by the Wake County Commissioners. Of the 10 largest counties in the state, only Cumberland and Buncombe remain on the 8-year cycle. All other counties have shortened it. So we're doing it because we're required to do it at least once every 8 years by the North Carolina General Statutes. And it reestablishes equity and fairness in the tax base. Properties in Wake County may change value up or down by property type and by location fairly drastically. This is a very active market, and I'll show you some examples of that here in a few minutes. So when we're talking about the reappraisal countywide, we're talking about 85% of the tax base. For Rolesville, it's a little bit different. The base is a little heavier on real property, about 88% of your base. And then 15% of the base is already appraised annually. In the case of Rolesville, 12% is appraised annually. This would be business personal property. It would be cars, aircraft, boats, and then public utility properties are appraised annually. That's Duke Energy Progress, Colonial Pipeline, things like that. For this project, this is just a snapshot of how we conducted it in the office versus in the field. For our residential properties, we reviewed the majority of those from our office. We have very good software. We fly the county every year and take aerial photography. There's a lot of new subdivisions with permits being issued daily, so we're in these neighborhoods on a daily basis. So for reappraisal purposes, there's a lot that we can do from our office to cut down on the travel and expense associated with being in the field to hopefully reduce the cost on taxpayers. For our rural areas, we got out into more than 50% of those because sometimes in the rural areas, there's not very many building permits. We're not out there very often, so we want to get a good snapshot of the condition of the buildings and structures out there. And then we do like to get out and look at a majority of our commercial properties because odds are they will be appealed. So for our costs on contracts, we have driven down the cost that we spend on a per parcel basis steadily. I'm pretty proud of this. We've basically reduced our contract costs by about 50% since 2008. A large majority of that was reduced because we shortened the cycle to 4 years. In doing so, we brought in more full-time staff, which you'll see on the next slide, and we spent less on more expensive contract assistance. When we were on the 8-year cycle, we only needed help for 4 years. So instead of adding full-time staff, we brought in contractors. When we were done, we sent them on their way. Contractors are more expensive than full-time staff. So we added 11 staff to our office since the county commissioners shortened the cycle to 4 years. That added about $2.50 per parcel for the full-time staff, but was offset by the reductions in contracts. So we did do the 2020 reappraisal for less money on a per parcel basis than the 2016 project. What does the town pay for this? So we charge a commission rate of 0.2%. For the last fiscal year ended, we did all of your property tax activity for $8,460.
That's
About-
Rolesville,
Rolesville, yes, sir.
ETJ and city limits, or just
City limits.
City limits.
City limits. We don't apply your tax rate in the ETJ.
Okay,
0.2%, and that's been a steady cost that we have charged all Wake municipalities going back over 25 years. In 2013, the State Department of Motor Vehicles took over collecting car taxes and combined it on the renewal offer. They charge 2.6% or $13,500. Why do I say this? I feel like we offer a pretty good bargain to the town. This fiscal year, we also took over billing and collecting your solid waste fees. We combined those with your property tax bills, and hopefully, I haven't heard any complaints. I think that's going well. So results for the 2020 reappraisal countywide, it's a 24% increase, roughly 6% per year. 33% commercial, 20% residential. Now these are countywide averages. Here's some history, just a snapshot to give you some context of history. Total parcel count in Wake County has doubled in the last 28 years. Single-family parcel count has tripled countywide in the last 28 years. You can see how much the value increased in a good economy on an 8-year cycle. We realized 43%, 43%, and 40% increases in a growing economy on a 8-year cycle. That was one of the reasons why the commissioners chose to reduce the cycle to 4 years to try to ease some of that valuation sticker shock. The 2016 project was sort of an anomaly because it was a correction following the recession. For Rolesville specific, the average is a little less than the countywide. On residential, 13% increase, commercial 15% increase, and then total change attributable to the reappraisal, 13%. And then here is a snapshot, in case you're curious, of the other municipal jurisdictions in the county and their changes for residential and commercial. So the drivers, what drove the change countywide on residential? What we saw was that the greatest demand and the lowest supply was on properties, residential properties priced below $250,000. Much higher demand, and there is a supply problem in a lot of jurisdictions, which drove up values dramatically. Specific to Rolesville, this is your residential property mix and how the average values changed. One of the unique things about Rolesville is that you have more properties assessed over $450,000, over $250,000 than below it. So that was the main driver that the residential change lagged the countywide average. This is the heat map of the residential change by township, and this is for 2016. Okay? Coming out of the recession in 2016, we actually had decreases in value, average values, countywide, pretty much everywhere except Southwest Wake. So value shifted from northeast and southeast Wake to southwest Wake in 2016 as the county recovered from the recession. For 2020, all the blue is gone. So we have average value increases in every township, but rather than it shifting from east, north, and southeast Wake to southwest Wake, now it's shifted from southwest Wake to east and southeast Wake. Almost the exact opposite of what we saw in 2016. The reason for this is because this is where the homes are located, valued below $250,000. The commercial value drivers, once again, are apartments and hotel motel, and this was the same as 2016. The apartment market is incredibly strong in Wake County, just incredibly strong. So countywide, this is the real property tax base prior to being reappraised. Countywide, it was 70% residential, 30% commercial, 131.3 billion in taxable value. After being reappraised, it shifted 2% of the burden off of residential to commercial, and the value increased roughly 31 billion to 162.1 billion countywide. This is the largest real property tax base in the state. It's bigger than Mecklenburg counties. For Rolesville, this is the real property tax base prior to being reappraised. Very heavily residential, 91%. After being reappraised, it's still 91% residential, 9% commercial. And the new taxable value after reappraisal is roughly 1.1 billion. Now, this is before we have added your 2020 new construction. So this number will increase. So North Carolina offers property tax relief options. These are authorized by the North Carolina General Assembly. Tax administrators in all 100 counties have to administer these programs uniformly. There is no local option to do anything different. So the elderly exclusion, oftentimes called the homestead exclusion, is age and income based. So the property owner has to be 65 or older, and for 2020 have an income of $31,000 or less. If they qualify based on those requirements, then we can reduce their value by 50% on their home and 1 acre home site. Okay? If a property owner is not 65, but they're totally and permanently disabled, and their income is less than $31,000, the same thing applies. We can reduce the value of their home and 1 acre by 50%. Now, there's a slightly different flavor of this exclusion that will go up to an income of $46,500, but rather than being value-based, it's based on income and tax. So assume that a property owner has an income of $40,000. What we would do is we would apply a factor of 5% to that. So 5% of $40,000 is $2,000. If their tax bill exceeds $2,000, they would have to pay the $2,000, and then anything above and beyond that would be deferred. Not excluded, deferred. We would track the deferred tax, and if they ever sold the property, they would owe that deferred tax plus interest for the current year and 3 prior years. It was really not designed for this area. It was designed more for beachfront properties or mountain view properties that have extreme values and high taxes. To put it in perspective, there's 26 properties in Wake County that qualify for this. So it's not heavily relied upon. There's a exclusion for disabled veterans, 100% totally and permanently disabled through a service-connected issue. There is no income requirement on this. If they qualify, we reduce their value by $45,000. These programs are not heavily used in Wake County, and that's the question of, do people just not qualify, or do they not know that they could qualify? So we've been trying to get the word out to encourage people to review this. Property owners have to apply. They can call our office to get an application, and the due date for applications is June 1st.
Do you all work in partnership with the DAV, Disabled Veterans, that association?
Not specifically, no, ma'am.
Okay. I have someone to reach out to you then.
Okay. So the project schedule, we sent out the notices last week. Property owners started receiving their notices at a trickles pace on Thursday, but by Friday, it was obvious that people were getting their notices based on our call volume. We expect an informal appeal rate of about 7% on 400,000 parcels. That's just shy of 30,000 appeals. In February, I will submit a list of candidates to our county commissioners of individuals willing to serve on the local board of equalization and review. I'm still receptive to receiving interested individuals. It is a little bit time consuming, not too terribly bad. I would expect a member to probably have to meet with us 10 to 12 times this calendar year. They're full day hearings. It's a task that it requires someone with a lot of patience, the ability to absorb a lot of information quickly and then make a decision. It would be nice if they have experience in government, farming, the law, appraisal, something that gives them knowledge of Wake County real estate, realtors, things like that. But they are all-day hearings. So it's imperative that those who are willing to serve be able to serve and really control their own work calendar.
Mr. Kenred, if I may question
Yes, sir.
something on that. As a former, I'm a real estate broker, as well as a former appraiser. And when I looked at mine that I got over the weekend, that seemed to be very accurate when you take in a 6% annual appreciation rate. But there are people out there that are not happy with their evaluations. So this process, and I've had some phone calls in regard to what to do, and it begins in April. So they can come before your board in April and appeal and contest this. Do they need to set up appointments in advance? These are the questions that I'm
Sure.
getting. What is the process for coming before your board?
It's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. So right now, what we are accepting is what's called an informal review request. That's even before this Board of E&R. So in the notice of new value we had a form in there. It's called an informal review. And property owners can fill that out. They can mail it to us, but even better, they can go on our website and fill it out electronically. wakegov.com/tax portal, where they can just go to our Wake County website. It's pretty easy to navigate to it. On that tax portal, we give them everything that we've got, so they can see all the information about their property. And that's the thing I would tell people to do first, is look at the characteristics of your property. Look at the heated square footage. Look at the sketch. Is it your house? Does it look like your house? The quickest way for us to make a valuation error is to not have the property characteristics correct in our records. That's an easy fix. They don't have to make an appointment. They can come down to our office. They can just call. They will be routed to an appraiser to help them go through it. We try to make this as easy and painless for people as possible. It's very inconvenient, quite honestly, to come downtown. Parking is an issue. You have to walk through metal detectors. It's just not very convenient.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Let's say that a person wants to come downtown and talk to you about a piece of raw land. And he's got 10 acres, and you've got it priced at $500,000, and he knows it's not worth $500,000 or valued at $500,000. He knows it's not worth that because of the riparian buffers. He's got a blue line stream running through it, and he's got terrible topo. Okay, does he need to bring that evidence with him, or will you be able to pull it up on the screen so he can plead his case?
We have so much information on each property, it would probably shock a reasonable person. We have all those GIS layers. We have the buffers and the topo, and we've got all that.
So if he stands up and says, I'm here because of PIN number such and such, you can pull it up there and he can plead his case with
Absolutely.
that?
Yes, sir. So we go, if people want to go through this informal review with us, that's fine. If they don't want to go through the informal review with our staff, on March 2nd, we will make the Board of Equalization and Review application form available.
Oh,
Okay? So from March 2nd until May 28th. May 28th is the last day to file an appeal with the Board of E&R. May 28th. At some point, you've got to cut off the process and just work the appeals you've got. You can't continuously receive them. So May 28th is the last day to file an appeal with the Board of E&R.
but the appeal process starts in April.
That's when they will meet for the first time, is in April, the Board of E&R. And that is a little more formal, but not so formal as like a court of law. So it's just 5 or 6 members. They will pull the information up on a screen. The property owner can come in and make their case as to why the value's wrong. The board will ask a few questions. They might ask staff a few questions as to, how we came up with our value, and then they'll make a decision. Okay? If a property owner is not satisfied with the Board of E&R's opinion, then they can appeal that to the State Property Tax Commission. And it goes on and on. There's multiple layers of appeals. But to start with, it's just very informal. If someone has an appraisal, send it to us from the last 2 years. There is good information in an appraisal. It may help us realize there's data errors. We'll take all the information they can give us. That answer your question?
It does. My last question, I hope, is in regard to the tax rate, which I know is beyond your control. But the people in this room experienced a 10% tax increase this past year.
Yes, sir.
That this board had nothing to do with it because it wasn't done at Rolesville, it was done downtown, and we had no control over it. Now these people in this room are going, their next tax bill will reflect that 10% increase plus a 15 or 13 to 20% increase in tax value. That's harsh.
It's another great question. You're asking all the great questions tonight. So on the tax portal website, wakegov.com/tax portal, we built a new tool for 2020. It's called a revenue neutral tax calculator.
Okay.
Okay? So go to wakegov.com/tax portal. There's a drop down in the top left corner for real estate. You click that and there's a button for Wake County Revenue Neutral Tax Calculator. If you plug in your real estate ID, which is on your notice of new value, and hit search, it will pull up the current property value and the prior property value,
Right.
okay, to do a direct comparison. Then we plugged in estimated revenue neutral tax rates for all the jurisdictions who would verify that. Rolesville, your staff verified that the estimated revenue neutral tax rate for the town is, I believe, 44 cents.
Sounds right.
For Wake County, the estimated revenue neutral tax rate is 60 cents compared to 72.07. So it's 12 cents lower. So we have showed what the estimated new tax liability will be if the revenue neutral rates are adopted by Wake County and the jurisdictions.
So it's a possibility we'll see a 12-cent reduction from 72 to 60?
The revenue neutral rate is 60 cents.
Okay.
And that has to be published in the budget. It doesn't have to be adopted. So that's all contingent on the budget process, and that's
Certain people want to get reelected down there, they need to.
that's elected officials. That's not anything I control. But we have the tool out there. So the tipping point, countywide, on every property is 20%. Okay? So if a property changed in value 20%, and if revenue neutral rates are adopted, then the tax liability should basically be a wash compared to the prior year.
So a lot of people should experience the same tax bill that they got last year,
Correct.
you know, even though that in the assessed value increased, the tax rate will reflect it, will come down to offset it.
Correct.
That's if he says if you adopt that.
If it's adopted, yes.
Right.
Yeah, and it should be. I mean, this is brutal,
We're hopeful.
yes.
So
Thank you.
we built a lot of tools. It's the most transparent that I've ever seen in North Carolina County be with a reappraisal. Kind of scared me a little bit. Thought it would probably really drive a high appeal rate, but from what I have seen so far, people really appreciate it, and
Okay.
it's been very positively received.
Thank you.
Again, May 28th is when the Board of E&R adjourns from receiving more appeals. And you all will go through your budget process for fiscal year '21 and set rates.
For that Board of Appeals, when are those decisions made? Do they render them right away, or is there a time period that you will hear back?
It's a very fast-paced day, and it's really not practical for the board to be able to render a decision immediately, but they will resolve the entire docket by the end of the day.
Gotcha.
And then we are required as staff to send out letters to notify people what the new value is and then convey to them their appeal rights beyond that.
So it's pretty quick. It's not a long wait process.
It
sounds
doesn't,
like.
it doesn't behoove us to drag things out.
Gotcha.
We like to get it going. So this is our special phone number for the reappraisal and our dedicated email address. Again, that's the URL for the tax portal. Everything that you could possibly think about for this reappraisal is available there, and then some. I also brought you all some customer service cards. It's good probably to keep these in your pocket if you go out. So if someone asks questions, you can give this to them and direct them directly to us.
Thank you.
Need more, I'd be glad to give it to you. And with that, if there are any more questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Otherwise, I appreciate the time.
Any questions, board? Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wake Forest Rolesville Transit Study Presentation, RSI and Associates.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Ray Boylston. I'm with RLS and Associates. I'm a senior associate with that firm. I've been with them 3 years. I've lived in Wake County since 7th grade. Grew up in Raleigh, lived in Zebulon, Wendell, live in Wake Forest now. I'm about 2.5 miles from here down Rogers Road. I'm honored to be the project manager for the Wake Forest Rolesville Joint Transit Study. And I've got other members of our firm that will assist. They are not here tonight, but I will be working with them in concert on the development of the plan. And this is just a quick shot of the players involved from our firm. So this is a lot of organizations are involved. We got a lot of stakeholders on this. Rolesville, Wake Forest are funding partners, Campo. All these players will be involved in the project steering committee and through direct contact with our firm to them. So how did this plan begin? I'm sure you've heard a little bit about the Wake Transit Plan. It's called a community funding area program. Wake Forest is one of a number of outlying communities. Some have already begun their planning work. And so we've had our kickoff meeting just a few weeks ago with the project steering committee here. And we've got some feedback. We're just getting started with looking at existing conditions, demographics in the area. And so we'll be pulling that together soon, and our next meeting with the project steering committee will be kind of laying out those existing conditions. We'll be looking at development of alternatives, a public participation process, and then draft and final report presentations. As I said, we've had the kickoff meeting. We've identified key stakeholders. And these are just some of the areas we look at. This is pretty standard for transit planning. I forgot if I mentioned, I've been in the transit industry for over 30 years. Worked with Wake County, State DOT, Public Transit, and Town of Cary as a transit director for 14 years. So here are some of we want to make sure and reach out to these different groups, the business leaders, the disabled community, the seniors. I'll be talking with some of the senior center directors. And just to clarify, this is a Wake Forest Rolesville plan, but as you know, Wake Forest already has a Wake Forest Loop service. Wake Forest staff is on the project steering committee and agreed to a study area that includes all of the town of Rolesville, town limits, but we'll go down the Rogers Road corridor to connect to an area where that loop route is. So it's not, we're not going to reinvent the wheel for Wake Forest because they've already done their transit planning, but we're going to include that area that we think might be one of the alternatives so we can determine what that area looks like, how it would match up, if it makes sense for a particular transit alternative. Looking at the days and hours of service, areas served, service policies, fare structure, we'll look at the whole 9 yards. And just different alternatives. It could be expand what is already available with Go Wake Access. None of this is etched in stone. We're not making judgments before we have all the material, but with a community of the approximate size of Rolesville and the existing services, these are some areas that we'll definitely explore. As I said, Wake Forest has the loop service. Look at potential. Does it make sense to connect for people that need some mobility assistance to connect with that service? And perhaps there may be some Uber Lyft option. There's a number of transit systems around the country that have a piece of their system that may do the first mile, last mile connection with a commuter route or a bus rapid transit route or a light rail line. And more of the rural areas or at least suburban areas are looking at those options as well. Another is how could we maybe help bolster ridership to the Rolesville Express route that just started up in the past few months.
I was looking at that chart there.
This one?
Yes. It looks like, and it's hard to see it from here, but if I recall, it looks like it's some AM pickup, but there's no P. How do you get back? If you,
Now I think it's got PM. Yeah, there's 5:42 in the morning to 7:42, and then PM 5:30 in the evening to 7:30 at the new Bethel Baptist Church. I'm sorry, I couldn't get that bigger.
Is it less than the AM then? If you look at the chart, it looks like it's more pickups in the morning.
Well, I think the PM is showing just 2 stops instead of the 4 for the route times.
Okay.
I will double check on that, but that's the way I read it.
Yeah, this doesn't show how this bus gets from Wake Forest to Rolesville.
That one don't go to Wake Forest.
This one does not go to Wake Forest, it's just straight?
No, sir. This is just the Wake Forest to Triangle Town Center to the north
Okay.
campus of Wake Tech, and then the Triangle Town Center Mall.
I thought that they were going to combine it and they would come down Rogers Road. And the reason I asked that is we have a senior citizens complex, an apartment complex, 70-some members right off of Rogers Road
Right.
as you get into Rolesville. And it would be very convenient if a stop could be there. But that's something we could talk about.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the alternatives we're looking at, and that's one particular group that is very important to take into consideration.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so for each scenario, there'll be a detailed budget. You know, again, the days and hours of service, what are the funding sources, the operating cost, potential service providers. Could it be an existing provider now? Could it be Raleigh? Could it be Wake County? Or could it be a new one? And then a process to really, if an alternative is selected and Wake Forest and Rolesville want to move forward, how do we monitor that to make sure that this is a viable service and it's being used by the citizens and helpful? So you have to set up an evaluation process. And then a really detailed implementation plan. If you as the commissioners select one that you want to move forward with, we would develop more details and things, as you mentioned, Commissioner Wilson, in terms of actual, if it was a route, an actual stop location and things like that. We'd get into the weeds a little bit with that. And so next steps, again, we'll meet with the project steering committee members and go over existing conditions and development trends. The planning director here, I've known Danny for quite a few years, so we'll be getting together, making sure we're capturing all that information. And then meeting 2, demographics report. 3, that's where we really start looking at alternatives. And this here really needs to be updated, because I want to make sure when you got this, the first highlighted section in the bright yellow, we're actually going to flip that, and the presentation will definitely be to you for your feedback and final recommendation before we go to Campo. Just want to make sure that that you're aware of that. And this is my contact information, and if you have any questions whatsoever now, or if you think of something later, feel free to give me a call.
Ray, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, early on in your presentation, you talked about the different demographics that you wanted to engage with.
Mm-hmm.
In that process down below, where you're talking about kind of your next steps, where does the public get involved? I see the meeting 4 on the feedback, but are they engaged on the front end with some ideas and input? Because I think that's important.
That's a really good question, and I may have passed over that a little bit too quickly. So we'll get with all the key stakeholders. I'll meet with a lot of those individually. This could be a leader in the senior citizen arena. I'm meeting with a staff person for ARC of the Triangle to kind of capture the disabled needs. So we'll capture all that, and I believe, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we have let's say we have 3 final alternatives, I think we want to move forward with that and present to the public to try to get feedback on the alternatives, so that when we come to you, we can have a summary of those findings and what the feedback was, and you will have an idea of kind of where the citizens that were involved in that and participated, what their thoughts are.
So the
Absolutely.
18 to 24 group, I saw that called out specifically. You have a source for that, or you need a source for that?
Well, I'm hoping, I think the town is going to assist some with the website and
Good.
methods like that.
Awesome.
Maybe Facebook. We'll try anything and everything. That is a group, when I was transit director in Cary, that 18 to 30, they were, I think they made up about 35–40% of our riders.
Good.
Yeah, so that is very important.
Good, good.
Absolutely.
And just one thing I want to highlight, just something that comes to mind, being a mother of 3 millennials. One's a zillennial, I guess. But I remember when they were 13, 14, 15, just starting to work. So even prior to being 18 years old, the need for transit may be there, because I was looking at, I think our transportation plan, they were talking about how everybody's in their single little cars. So I grew up in Seattle from teenage to adulthood, and it was sure nice to have transit, because I took 3 buses to get to college, and without that I would have been struggling to get around. But when we think about that working age, like Chick-fil-A, I think hires at 14. I was shocked. I thought it was 15 or 16, but 14, and them being able to get around without their parents being there, because they may not be there to transport them, but really try to capture that audience that has children in that age group, I think it's important.
I would have loved that option. I had to ride my bike all over
See,
the place.
or walk.
It was could be quite precarious sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah. But
Thank
good
you so
points, and we again really excited about helping out the community that I live in today, and trying to do the very best and laying out some options for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate
Okay.
you
All right.
coming out tonight. Community Transportation Plan Presentation, Kimberly Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. I am Allison Flewitt. I'm with Kimley Horn and Associates. I've been with Kimley Horn for 16 years now, based in Raleigh that entire time, though I'm originally a Tennessee girl, but don't hold that against me. Excited to talk to you all about the Comprehensive Transportation Plan. This has been something that's a long time coming. Your last Comprehensive Transportation Plan is, I think, 2002. So it's been a little while since you guys have had a chance to really do that deep dive into what are the transportation needs for the town. So it's an exciting time as well, with so many other planning efforts, some of which you've already heard, some of which you're yet to hear, going on at the same time. We really have the opportunity to kind of put a lot of parts and pieces together as we come up with that overall transportation strategy. So just want to set the stage a little bit about what we're talking about when we do talk about our comprehensive transportation plan. So this community transportation planning effort really sets the stage. We want to establish that vision. It has been a while since we've really addressed what our needs are and what our priorities are for transportation in the town. So starting to understand our needs and deficiencies, I'm sure I could talk to every one of you, and off the top of your head, you can tell me several of the needs and deficiencies from a transportation standpoint. But we do have that opportunity to engage with the public as well as many stakeholders throughout this process. We go through this to actually develop those particular projects as well as strategies. It doesn't just have to be infrastructure at the end of the day. We want to think a little bit more broadly about policies. We're doing this hand in hand with the UDO, so that actually gives us a really unique opportunity to think about how this translates into some of the other documents and initiatives that govern the way that the town functions. And then ultimately creating an action plan for implementation. And when you think about this plan, when you think about the CTP, you want to think about it as a communication tool. This is something that needs to communicate to the members of your public, to your citizenry. It needs to communicate outwardly as well to folks like NCDOT, to Campo, which is your MPO. You need to talk to the county, your neighboring jurisdictions, so that folks really understand what the priorities are of Rolesville. So ultimately, securing that project funding and then coordinating with development so that we can do something that allows you to advocate for yourselves instead of having other people making those decisions on your behalf. So the objectives of our plan, obviously previous planning efforts are something that we have a strong starting point from. Now, while it has been a little while since your last CTP, you've done many other things in that interim. One of the most significant that we'll certainly be drawing on is your overall comprehensive plan for the town of Rolesville. It's a couple years old, but there's a lot of great material. Transportation was one of the areas that was addressed as a part of that, so we're certainly able to draw on that. We look at some more particular studies. You had a downtown study that we'll be able to draw on that you guys are actually already realizing some success from as well. And then also capitalizing on some of our ongoing efforts, such as the transit study that you just heard about, and then also the UDO development. And then obviously when we're talking about our recommendations of improvement, this is a comprehensive transportation plan, so we're not just talking about roadways. We're talking about what are we doing with our intersections? What are we doing with our sidewalks? How are our bikes interfacing with this? How do we interface with our transit service? What does that really need to look like as an overall system? Even freight operations, where do the trucks come in if they're needing to make deliveries or servicing some of those particular routes? And then starting to understand that plan for 2045. One of the things that we have the chance to do is kind of sync up with that forward vision. So the region is actually planning for 2045 right now as well. That's their current out year for their metropolitan transportation plan that you'll see from Campo. And so being able to align with that and starting to understand in that forward look, what is Rolesville going to look like in the future? What are some of our needs going to be in the future, and how do we proactively plan for those so that we can actually get out ahead and start to address some of the needs that are going to arise? So just briefly talking about our study area for this, we are going to be looking beyond our town boundaries to be inclusive of the ETJ as a part of this planning process. I do want to note that although we have this nice blue boundary around everything showing what we're actually going to be covering, that it's obviously very important for us to look beyond our boundaries and to link up with what's happening with our neighboring jurisdictions. We certainly don't want this to be something that tells a different story as you go immediately beyond the borders of Rolesville. So that's something that we do try to be very proactive with addressing as we go through this process. Some of our key planning partners when we start to think about some of the major agencies that are going to be involved with ultimately helping you to communicate and implement some of your vision for transportation in the future include folks like Wake County, who is updating their comprehensive plan right now as well. So the timing is right to make sure that we're syncing all of these things up. Campo, again, your metropolitan planning organization. As a matter of fact, at this exact moment, they are also working on a sector plan. One of the things that Campo does, it's a very big agency, a very big study area, is they try to dig in a little bit more detail and understand for kind of their quadrants, so the northeast, southeast, southwest, what's happening in a little bit more detail. So a northeast area study, this is actually the second iteration of that, is starting right about this time as well. Rolesville is a part of that, as are many of your neighboring communities. So we'll be linking up with understanding what kind of that sub-regional vision is that's happening and being led by Campo. NCDOT, obviously a huge partner with us. Most of your major roads are state-maintained roads, just as everybody else's are in the state of North Carolina. So we certainly want to be sure that we're understanding what the priorities are from the state. One of the things that's unique about our state is that we do have a well-defined prioritization process for how our projects actually get scored and funded as they go through the state level. And that's something that your MPO, you're fortunate to be in Campo in that regard. They've been very proactive at starting to understand what that looks like and how you engage with that. And we can do that here as well through your community transportation plan. One of the ways that we do this is by thinking about our public engagement. So we kind of try to espouse this first from a philosophical approach. What does our public engagement really need to consist of as a part of this? And we look at it in two different ways. Certainly, we want to engage with folks. We're very interested in obtaining meaningful feedback as a part of this process. But we also know that it's our responsibility to help inform folks, to help people understand what it is that we're really talking about, and then empowering them to help shape the vision for what this plan can ultimately consist of. So by providing the right vocabulary and the right tools to the public, we can then gather the best available feedback. We're going to be engaging with the public in a number of different ways. So we have a lot of different strategies. We do this very intentionally because not everybody likes to come to a public workshop. I have 2 kids myself. At the end of the day, I'm done, I'm out. But you give me an online survey, I will take your survey. I will happily do that after my kids are in bed. So having a range of different tools and techniques that we can engage with folks is going to be really important. So we do things like engaging with you all, engaging with the members of our planning board throughout to help make sure that we're on track and receiving the right guidance at the right time. Community event outreach. So we're not just asking people to come to us, we're trying to come to the people as well, where they may already be at scheduled events. Stakeholder group meetings. We want to pull in folks that may have some particular interests or valuable information that we can dive into a little bit more deeply. Certainly engaging online. You heard a little bit about that in the last presentation. That's increasingly more important for everything that we do. And then also having open house meetings and some online survey techniques so that we have that range of both active and passive engagement tools. So at this point, I kind of want to set the stage for you. We haven't gone fully into the conclusion of our current condition summary, but we've started to gather some of our data about a snapshot of Rolesville as it stands right now. You all probably know a lot of this information sitting where you do right now, but I thought it might be interesting to hit a couple of the highlights. So first off, your population growth. We've compared a lot of what we've seen here in Rolesville to what's been going on in Wake County overall. And if I could sum it up, I would say that Rolesville is essentially everything Wake County's doing, only more. So everything that's happening trend-wise in Wake County, it seems to be happening in a little bit more magnified way here in Rolesville. A great example is the population growth. Now, certainly you're starting at a little bit lower number, so when you see a number like 263% over a 10-year period, that kind of explains where we're coming from there. But certainly robust population growth, which we don't expect to change anytime soon. When we look at what's going on from your overall age, population age, again, we see a very similar pattern emerge. The lines that are kind of going on the presentation on either side represent the trends for Wake County, and then the bars represent what's happening here in Rolesville. So Rolesville is essentially a magnified version of the trend that we see here in Wake County, with your median age at 36. From an income perspective, the median income that we see here in Rolesville does exceed that of Wake County as a whole. So you do have a higher income household population. Education level, I'm not showing you percentages here, so this isn't a total apples to apples comparison, but looking overall, we also have an overall higher education level attainment here in Rolesville as compared with Wake County overall. Employment level, interestingly, we actually have a higher unemployment rate in Rolesville than does Wake County. But in the market analysis that was done for Rolesville, it was dug into a little bit more of this trend and did start to point out some of the prevalence of higher income single income households. So that may be part of what's explaining some of the unemployment numbers, because those are representative of all folks of working age.
So that means that folks are eligible to work, but they necessarily don't work or
They
don't
may
have
be
to work.
choosing not to work.
Gotcha.
Correct. So, and we can't, certainly from this number, this overarching look, I can't dig into it enough to tell you what percentage is that versus true unemployment, but the market analysis did start to indicate that that was part of what was happening with that trend. So we also like to look at some of our journey to work numbers, some of our transportation considerations. So I thought this was an interesting one. We always like to look within the town for our working day, who lives here and works here, that's the number in the circle, who lives somewhere else, comes in here to work, and then who lives here but leaves to go somewhere else to work. So obviously the number that's actually living here and working here, pretty low. But you do have a robust commute volume both in and particularly out of the area.
What is that 60 number based on? I mean, how did you come up with that number?
That's actually, the census puts together some journey to work numbers as part of the American Community Survey. So it's gathered, I think, every 3 years.
So that's possibly in-home businesses, possibly?
It could be, or just folks that are, anybody that's staying within the town. So let's say if they teach at the school and live in a neighborhood in the school or something like that.
And that 60 represents that group?
60 people?
Right.
60 people.
That's
Yeah.
really, that's
So
bad. I
low.
knocked on a lot of doors and that's really all.
Yeah, we got a lot of people that work at home. I mean, they work
A lot of
IT and all
people.
that stuff, and I don't know how you get a handle on that. How do you know that?
But
Yeah.
what census data is it based on? It might be timing too.
You're saying 3 years ago.
Yeah, so it comes from the American Community Survey data, which is collected. It's not the decennial census, the big one that we're ramping up for. So it's the one that they do in kind of a smaller subsets, but they do it more frequently. So sometimes it's a helpful subset or snapshot because it's done more frequently. The thing that's not great about it is it has a lower sample size.
Okay,
So
that explains it.
Seems small.
yes, thank you, thank you, Kelly.
May not be 60 people.
Right.
It gives you a perspective of ratio.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, well said.
70 homes, 70 doors knocked on, 60 of them work from home. But I know it's not like that simple or easy, but I was just, as an example, because that's really low. That's why
Yes,
it's important
that was a
census and-
surprisingly low number. I completely agree. My eyebrows were raised when I saw that one. We also look at the vehicle availability. That's an indication for us when we look at that of how we need to be considering our alternate modes of transportation. You brought up an interesting point about that earlier, but just kind of looking at that more globally. We have an extremely low population here of residents that do not have a vehicle available to their household. So that's helpful for us to understand, but even a single vehicle available can limit access to transportation in places where other modes are not as easily available. So that's just something for us to consider. We do have an average commute time of around half an hour for our residents here in Rolesville. We also, and this is for our journey to work again, this is our mode split. So how are folks getting to and from work on average? So we don't have transit on here because, again, our data is a couple years old. Transit wasn't here. It's here now. I love that it's here. I wouldn't expect that those percentages would have drastically changed just because of the characteristics of the service. But our walk and bike, I'm sure there is somebody that's walking and biking, but not a lot of folks. Maybe 60, yeah, 60 folks. They walked around their house and back in. So predominantly we're single occupancy drivers, and then we have a smaller percentage of carpoolers. So that's just something that we may want to contemplate as we go through our process. Is that something that we're okay with as it is? Is that something that we're going to just try to embrace, or is that something that we want to change, or that we want to try to influence as we go through the development of our planning process? We also consider some of the things that are going to be coming online, some of the potentially committed projects. So this is one great example. These are our locally administered projects program, LAP. This is something that goes through Campo. Essentially, they get an allocation of money from the federal government that they're able to portion out through a competitive process. So Rolesville actually identified a couple of projects, sent them through the LAP scoring, and quite just recently those scoring numbers were released. And Rolesville's projects actually scored right at the very top of those lists, which is very exciting. And I think a testament to some of the proactive planning work that has gone on in the town to develop the case for both of those projects. So I think that's well done by you all. I will note that the dollar amounts that are shown here are only reflective of the amount that is coming from Campo. So it is also important to note that all these LAP projects do require a local match in order to proceed. So just throwing that out there. Other thing I want to point out is development trends. I know this map is hard to see, but you'll get the general idea if you kind of focus on the areas with circles. We have an aerial up here from 2010 and an aerial from 2019, circling the same areas on both. And the moral of the story is those areas didn't have much in them in 2010, and they have stuff in them now. And it's pretty much all residential stuff, with the exception of Rolesville High School. You guys have had a lot of new developments that have come online in the past 9 years. You have new developments that are currently being talked about that are going to be coming online in the next couple of years, and continued interest in this area as well is something that we certainly want to be aware of, because it puts pressure on your transportation system. And we have to start thinking about how our arterials and how our major roadways are going to respond, and if we need to introduce other connections into our system to help reduce some of the pressure on some of those connections as well. So just hitting a couple of the major phases of our process. We certainly want to start off with our project identification. As I mentioned, this is a wide variety of different project types. We try to keep our options open, certainly drawing from some of those previous planning efforts, but this is oftentimes we get a lot of great feedback from members of the public through this process as well, as they're starting to identify for us what their major needs and desires are. So we try to just gather all of that, kind of have almost a clearinghouse, a project universe, whatever you want to call it. And that's really our starting point to begin to match that up against some of the data that we have, whether that's congestion data coming from our regional travel demand model, safety data, gaps in our network for sidewalks and bike facilities, any of those different things, even the demographics that we pointed out earlier. One particular area of focus I did want to mention is we're going to be taking a look at the corridor represented by Rolesville Road, Young Street, and Averett Road. We want to give this area particular focus because I mentioned some of the development pressure that you all have had going on. A lot of that has been concentrated along this corridor. And so we see the added importance of trying to understand, based on the existing and projected traffic levels, what are the congestion levels? What does this road need to be when it grows up, essentially? What is the vision for this corridor? And then how do we start supporting that now, whether that's through new development, whether that's through phased improvements to that corridor, just starting to understand how that needs to better accommodate the growth that's coming. You already heard a description of our transit study. That's something that obviously we have the opportunity to tie in with very closely. That's going to shape what's happening here at the local level for your transit strategy, as well as tying in to your regional transit accommodations. And then ultimately, this takes us to prioritization and implementation. We want to be able to create a prioritized plan. So when I talk about priorities, I mentioned that the state has a prioritization system. The MPO has a prioritization system as well. Well, we may create our own prioritization here in Rolesville. Now, we're not going to throw out the others, but we want to make sure that we're respectful here of the vision that we develop early on in collaboration with you all and with the public and our other stakeholders, so that we make sure that we're responsive to some of those state and metropolitan criteria, but also responsive to the needs of the residents and the business owners and the citizens of Rolesville. So understanding that prioritization process, coming up with cost estimates, relating back to those goals, and then ultimately coming up with what is that action plan? What are the near-term items that you all can put in place? How can you communicate with some of those agency partners to start getting the ball rolling and get those next steps going, so that this isn't just a plan that sits on a shelf, it's an actionable plan for you all. So we're very much looking forward to working with you all over the coming months. Happy to take any questions that you all have at this time. Thank you.
Questions? Any questions?
I think I got mine in.
I have a couple. You showed the new developments, some of them that has been approved since 10 years ago. So they will already figure into your plan when you put it together?
Yes, that's exactly right. So what we're doing is we've worked with Kelly and Danny and Michael to start to pull all of the newest development plans, obviously the ones that have been approved, and just pulling all of that together, and then that will continue to kind of iterate as we go through, so that we have kind of the latest and greatest snapshot.
I know you mentioned it connects to some of the other plans we got going on, the UDO and things. And I'm not sure, did you mention the comprehensive land plan? Did you mention that one? Does this, you did?
Yes, so this absolutely ties into the comprehensive land use plan. I mean, this, ultimately, transportation is a part of your comprehensive plan that you currently have adopted, but I know you guys have been talking about updating and refreshing that as well. And these are very much hand in hand. Sometimes we see these things done in tandem. You guys are doing the UDO in tandem with this, which we like to see a lot of those things happen together when it's possible. It's not always possible. Because it allows us to iterate. It allows us to make sure that we're getting the best parts of each one, kind of going back and forth. So wherever we can, yes, we like to incorporate that.
I know this board, we get to see a lot of these impact studies. And I think, speak for myself and also for others, I think, agree somewhat. We don't see a lot of value in that. I mean, it's just looking at intersections and putting these ratings on there for A, B, C, D, and all. So is this study going to give us a better look at in other words, you know, if you have a water grid system, you know, it reaches a capacity. Mm-hmm. You know, you have a sewer system, it reaches capacity. Utilities, you know, power companies, you know, they can't put on any more customers than the wires will carry. I know we don't get a feel at what point we're getting that on development. You know, where do we get to a point where the roads doesn't suit the developments we're approving? And to us, the impact studies doesn't say that. It just talks about intersect. Is this going to give us a better feel of what the comprehensive land use plan should say? You know, we don't particularly need a 2,000 unit apartment in this location or something like that.
Yeah, I think we have the opportunity to explore that further as part of this, and there's a couple of ways that we're going to be able to do that. First, through the regional travel demand model. So the travel demand model allows us to actually put in projections of population and employment for some of our subset areas across the study area, and then we can actually kind of play with those a little bit if we want to, run it through, and then it does exactly what you're talking about. It ultimately generates that map that shows us what's over capacity, where are the pressure points on our network. So how we actually play with that, it's one thing to just kind of go and mess around with it, but we've talked with some of our main staff contacts about introducing a scenario planning component into this, where we are going to explore some of the effects of potential land use changes. Now, that wouldn't be something that would translate necessarily one-to-one into your land use plan. We're not going to get down to the parcel level necessarily. That's something that's really the provenance of a land use plan. But it will allow us to explore, you know, we believe this area is going to be our strong area of growth. What happens if we increase the growth in this area? That changes our population and employment numbers. We put that into our model. What does that do to our transportation? So we start to see some of those cause and effect things coming together. So we will have the opportunity to explore that within the CTP.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I think that was one of the things I was kind of looking for, and I think we were looking forward to give us
Good.
kind of what a model should look like. I think the last question I would have is, you know, in talking to folks, and I ask them about where our pain points are, and overall, they feel the town itself, the city limits, is not bad at the moment. The problem, like you showed on one of your graphs, you know, everybody's going out commuting, and most everybody's commuting down 401 to Raleigh, and between our end of our belt line to Noose River, it's awful. And everything we approve, it looks like it's getting worse. Anything goes in town, probably 90% of it, if they work, they're going to go that way. That's outside of our town. That's outside of our study area that you were doing up there. I think it's outside the study area. So how do we address that? How do you see that we can? Because really, that's our bottleneck right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a really good point, and not entirely unique to y'all, but certainly you guys have a kind of almost a single point of entry problem that you're faced with. Although that is not part of our study area, we can still communicate that that is a high priority for improvement for the town. And one of the nice things is that we're going to be then conveying this to Campo. And as members of Campo, you all have the ability to then help advocate for some of those projects and improvements, even if they're outside of your study area. So you can start to throw your weight and support behind a project like that. So for instance, we just completed a project like this in Smithfield. And one of the things that we recommended for them was support for rail service in Selma. Not in Smithfield, but it's important for them to have that in an adjacent town. And so that was something that they directly conveyed within their document and that they're going to be articulating in letters of support at the state level. So that's, I think, a way that we would probably want to continue to bring that up. Plus, we're going to have the right folks at the table as we have our steering committees, and I think that early and often, let's have that discussion when we have DOT and our Campo partners here with us.
I think this thing has been long needed. I think you said 2002 was the last one. Is that right? So let's do it. Let's get on it. So like it. Any other questions? Anybody else got a question? Thank you for coming. I
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. Kind of related to this, the next one is UDO Rewrite. Kimberly Horn will do that one also.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the commission. For the record, Kelly Klepper with Kimley Horn and Associates. Unlike Allison, I've only been at Kimley Horn about 15 years. We definitely got lucky with her. We got her straight out of middle school. That's why I always joke about with her. But seeing as this is a workshop, I want to make sure that you've got the opportunity to ask questions as you need to. Interrupt me, do whatever you need to so we can kind of talk through this, because as you know, this is going to be a fairly complex type of discussion we're going to have over about the next year. So tonight is kind of that initial foray into here's what we're going to do and why. Sit back, relax, we'll get it done. Okay? So with that, now some of you that were in the interview process actually got to see some of these slides, so don't give it away to those who didn't. But just a quick overall introduction. Key members of the team, and what you'll see real quick is Jonathan Whitehurst. He's what we're calling our project director. He's that link between not only the CTP, but also the UDO. So in essence, he becomes our eyes, ears, and more importantly, our conscience as we're moving forward. And in essence, he is kind of that bridge between the two documents and between the two groups. So we create that synergy between everybody that's working together on all three of these projects. And that's a critical aspect because, as Allison was talking about, she's got a lot of data. So we're already going to town and going and doing our homework on the growth projections. We're looking at the transportation. We're looking at commuting patterns. You may go, well, what does that have to do with the UDO? A lot, because we need to start thinking about how we are coding certain things, how those designs are going to work, and how we implement key components of the plan itself. So just a real quick overview of what we're going to talk about briefly, just linkages between your plans, existing code analysis. We're also going to give you a little bit of a snapshot as part of a possible code discussion, some of the timeline discussions, and of course the ever popular questions at the end of the night. Now there again, if you've got a question, please interrupt me, please ask the question. I'd rather you ask than not.
Okay.
So for those of you who were in the interview process, do not answer this question, please. So when you start talking about land use, you start talking about development form, you start talking about the processes that you have in play, which of those three is tied to the code, which is tied to the comprehensive plan and or the CTP? The answer? They're all tied together inherently. One informs the other and vice versa. So that's the reason we say it's critical, especially that the town is undertaking both of these endeavors at the same time because they're going to inform each other. So comprehensive plan was done back in 2017, so we've got really good relevant data to build from. The CTP is being undertaken as we speak. So those are providing that vision, that kind of pathway, the roadmap for us to move forward. How do you implement that? Where does the rubber meet the road? Literally with the UDO. That is your code. Those are your standards. That's what you want to see when something is being developed, when it's being constructed. What's it going to look like? How are they going to park it? Where are they going to put the structures on that particular piece of property? So all of that comes out of those visioning, all of those comes out of the pathways, those roadmaps, and there again, the standards come out of the UDO. That's what we're regulating to at the end of the day. So what are the UDO considerations? It's the public, it's the staff, it's the legislature. We all know we've got a brand new code a state statute that's coming out at the beginning this time next year that we have to be very conscious of. And of course the state, and this is one of those things my team loves to hear me say, in their infinite wisdom took two sections of the general statutes, combined it into one and said, here, we're going to make it easier for you. Yes and no. But at the end of the day, there's a new statute, a new standard that we have to kind of work towards. Best practices, things that as Kimley Horn, as practicing planners, as teams that have worked across not only, I'll say North Carolina, but also across the Southeast. Those are things that we've learned, that we've picked up on, and we understand. And I will tell you, I spent the better part of my career on the same side as these gentlemen right here. I was a community development director in the third fastest growing community in the state of Kentucky. we had Toyota. So if you've seen a Toyota Camry on the road, it is made in Georgetown. Your growth rate of 263+%, a little bit more than what we had, but at the same time, we were dealing with a lot of things. So I've sat on that side of the table, and a lot of our team has, so we understand when we're writing a code, it's got to be something that not only the staff can understand and implement, but the residents, the community, and especially from Michael's component, economic development perspective. Because if you have an industry, if you have a business, if you have somebody coming here and they say, what can I do on this piece of property? And you literally have to go, I don't even understand the code that we have, or more importantly, if you have to say, well, take a look at chapter 5, and then read chapter 9, and then actually you've got to go look at chapter 16 because that's where the definitions are. First thing that a lot of people do at that point is go, I'm going somewhere else. So we try to make it a little bit easier to use. From the existing code, we did a very quick 30,000-foot elevation kind of dive in on your code. And what we basically said was, there's not anything inherently bad or negative about your code, but it's like most codes. It's been patched together over time. It's been piecemealed. It's been band-aided. The standards are scattered throughout. And I gave you just that one example of a couple of things, and I've got more where you have to look through 2, 3, 4 sections of the UDO to understand exactly what I need to do on that specific piece of property. Some of the regulations are limited. Some of them are overly vague, and I've got a couple examples on that. Then you have an extreme number of zoning districts at play, 18 zoning districts, most of which are residential. So you've already started to kind of shape the way that you're growing as, well, we want to be a residential suburban community of Raleigh instead of having the codes in place to be able to support the commercial, the industrial, and the office types of uses. So we need to think about looking and developing some new codes and new standards alike.
Are you anticipating reducing the number of zoning districts?
Part of that process,
Just to
part of the process is going to be the education process. We're going to be sitting down with staff. We're going to be sitting down with the steering committee. Kelly and I have talked about this a little bit more. We're going to be sitting down with the development community and say, what's working, what's not from your perspective. So then we'll start looking at, can we consolidate portions of the residential districts into one district, taking 2 or 3 maybe and shuffling them down into one. Do we need to look at creating new zoning districts that are consistent with your comprehensive plan? And that becomes one of those questions of, if it's not, then we need to identify why and give you the tools to move forward with those districts. So long story short, probably looking at some consolidations, some new. At the end of the day, you're probably going to see, like I said, a little different look as far as your districts are concerned. Now, one of the things, especially on this slide, I always like to point out, and I actually had set this up as one of those gotcha moments, but I decided not to do that to you. When you look at your use table, which is actually part of your code in Chapter 5, you have 81 uses that are listed, basically saying, here's what you can do in each of your districts, and you got 81 things that are listed. When's the last time that the town looked at those list of uses? It's probably been a while, because you've got a use in there talking about monument making. Most places just kind of roll that into straight up industrial.
You've got 2 monument companies.
You got 2 monument companies, but is that a use that needs to be called out individually, or can it just be grouped under the overall industrial types of uses? You can start to clarify some of the uses. You can start looking at, parking lots for vehicles. That's actually listed as one of the standards that are applied as part of your zoning districts. Now, does that actually mean commercial parking or just a parking lot in general? And when you start looking and diving down into your definitions, it becomes even more unclear. The good news is you've got qualified staff that have worked with the code and can actually interpret it to the point of going, hey, Kelly, by the way, it's this, okay? But for the person who writes codes, been doing this for 27 years, and I'm taking a little bit of time to look at it, it's confusing. So we'll be working with staff to try to refine and clarify some of those uses and the table itself. When you look at your zoning district standards, the first thing that popped out to us was this is a very suburban-oriented code. Now, granted, these are your standards, the standard districts. You've got other districts where you get to modify and play, I'll say give and take on some of that. But just looking at the minimum square foot for a residential lot versus some of your non-residential uses, and to start looking at the lot widths. A lot of these are, like I said, they're 1990s. So we need to get you up at least into 2010, and let's try to get you a little bit ahead of the game as well. Signage. This is always a fun one. U.S. Supreme Court kind of said, well, you can start doing certain things, but for the most part, you can't do a lot. So your code there, again, has some good standards. We've been starting to take a look at it from the Supreme Court's decision perspective and saying, okay, here's some things to maybe be thinking about. But one of the things that we started to notice was you've got sign regulations, and then you've got the non-residential multi-tenant building. Then you have signs in non-residential subdivisions. Then it breaks it out whether it's a 100,000 square foot building, greater or less. And then there's footnotes that go with that. The numbers that you see there, the 6, 4, and 4, those are footnotes and additional standards that you have to think about when you're designing your signs. And at the end of the day, there again, you've got one provision in your code that also talks about within the commercial highway signs as a standard, as a use, come back before this body for review and approval, even though there's standards already embedded in the code in 2 other places.
That causes so much confusion when someone comes to us or someone's sign gets picked up. It's going back and forth. Okay, gotcha.
And there again, if you've got a standard and somebody's meeting that standard,
Right,
do you want to keep having them come back before?
exactly.
Or what's the review authority at this point for you to say, well, your code says you could do 60 square feet. We're not sure about that, but we're going to say it's 20. So if you want to go that route, that's fine. We just need to make sure we give you the tools to be able to legally say that at the end of the day. You have started making some changes to your code. You've got a couple of things that have been going through. I will applaud you on your parking standards going from the code and text language to actually starting to come up with a little bit user-friendly standard. There's ways that we can take that to the next level for you as well. One of the things that we did as part of our interview was to start going through, like I said, your existing code, which, by the way, there's your code. Just in case has anybody read it?
A lot of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it can get really, really entertaining. But what we basically said was, hey, just taking a quick look, here's some things that we're talking about. Here's some things that we're thinking about. And there again, we're not saying that the code is bad. We're just saying here's some things that we may view to be done a little differently and things to be considering. And at the end of the day, working with staff, working with these with the planning board and the commission, we're hopefully going to come up with like I said, a roadmap not only of the code, but also of the changes and implement those changes as part of this process. So what are some possible thoughts? This is the one I always love doing to folks. So what were the initial thoughts and why are those important? Well, one thing we don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some aspects we do want to throw out, but we don't have to do that all together. But more importantly, for those of you who are Far Side fans, the comic on the right is one of my favorites, especially because you start thinking about it as it relates to the code. And basically, for those of you who are like me, and you got to put the glasses on and actually see what that says. Suddenly, a heated exchange took place between the king and the moat contractor. And you start thinking, okay, what's that got to do with the code? Well, it has everything to do with the code. It talks about where should the moat have been built, what was the process to actually identify where it should have been built and how, and who reviewed the plans. Without those standards, you can see what happened. So it's always one of those fun ones.
Was this actually from 1990, or did you throw that in there to be funny?
Actually, that was just one of those things. I've had it with me for a while, so.
Interesting. Perfect.
The boat inside the wall.
There's so many little hidden meanings with the Far Side. But one of our challenges, one of the things that we talked about as part of our process was we want to help the town update, streamline, and reorganize your code. Take it from, you've got 15 articles right now, may still have 15 at the end of the day, but we're going to repackage them up. We may consolidate, we may move some certain things around. Make it easier to navigate through. That is a huge component. And with your continued growth, Residential is going to start attracting non-residential. We need to have the tools in place so that you as the town can say, here is exactly what we want it to look like and why. And then also, where we understand that the ordinance may have some challenges, try to bolster those up quite a bit. So, just another one of the looks that we did was the town center overlay. We took a look at that. Great standards that are there. You've got really good bones, but then we start looking at maximum building square foot of 15,000 square feet. Now, granted, it's a small area, so you can't go too crazy on that. But you start looking at the heights, the maximum heights, and then if you do additional heights, it only goes up to 45 feet, and if you go above 35 feet, it's an additional 1 foot setback for every foot above 35 feet. And within the district, who cares? But the way the code is written, it says the more you go up, albeit 10 feet, the more that you're pulling the building in, where this town center should really be more of a dynamic, free-flowing type of development opportunity. One of the things that we've actually done is to utilize graphics such as this to start identifying and illustrating when we're talking about blank walls and windows. Just reading the text is one thing. The graphic on the bottom is something we created for another community to say, here's what we're talking about. Give you that graphic image that says, here's the standard, here's kind of that visual that goes with it, and how you kind of start to measure at that point. Building height. There's what we were talking about with the town center. The graphic on the right is one that we did for another community. It said, because everybody kept saying, well, what does building height equate to? Is that stories? If we have stories, what does that mean? And, is that habitable space? Is that non-habitable where we can do storage or mechanical? So we said, okay, let's illustrate it. So we came up with a standard, and there's actually some text that goes with it, but the graphic on the right actually defines, based off of this community's definition, what is the ground floor? What's the second story or habitable space, third story, and then non-habitable? And then what is actually being used to measure that building height? So we start visually illustrating some of those standards at the end of the day. So I'm not going to dwell on this one. It's your signage. That's the existing sign code that you have right now. So you've got the standards that are in 3 individual tables. What's wrong with doing something like that, where we illustrate the sign itself? We know that is, in this case, it's a wall sign. We know the dimensions, we know the description, we know the lengths, the sizes, the locations, and anything that we need to know is all right there attached with that graphic. Now, there again, your standard right now is the text with the chart. It's laid out in 3 individual tables plus a series of footnotes or something like that. Something to think about. Now, this is something that Kelly and I are going to have to definitely walk through, to say the least, but it's the timeline. When we were interviewing, the question came down to, what can you do to consolidate the time? And the answer was, hire us to go along with the CTP, because we'll be able to dovetail on a lot of the information, a lot of the public outreach, a lot of the community involvement, a lot of the information that's going out there. We can joint venture this thing together, and we can move things a little bit quicker. Now, the one thing I will say is we definitely agree with the town manager on this one, is we don't want to move so fast that we just get a code without understanding what it is. The code, at the end of the day, has to be right. No ifs, ands, or buts. You got one really good chance to get this done right, or we can give you a code that ends up being like some of your plans. You put them on the shelf and you go, I don't know why we did that, because it's not going to work. We got to get it right. And if it means meetings, reviews, discussions with whoever, we're in it. So this is the initial timeline that we talked about with staff. This is, of course, still subject to some discussion with staff and just looking at some of the meetings and some of the planning board meetings and some of the workshops and outreach efforts as it relates to the CTP. So our charge at the end of the day.
Can you go through phase 2, phase 3, just to understand that a little more?
Sure. And it comes.
I think those are 2 important phases.
Sure. So just a quick, phase 1 is the UDO itself. That's where we're taking the code, the standards, and creating the new code itself. Phase 2 is equally as important because that's where we actually take what we do as part of the UDO and apply it to the zoning map. We start looking at what parcels are zoned, and if we need to identify where parcels need to be rezoned, we identify those. So we start looking at what are the existing zoning designations. One, does it make sense for those properties based on what's on the ground today? We start looking at what were some recommendations and some thoughts from our staff and our team for possible rezonings, and what would that look like at the end of the day. There again, all of this is done through a public hearing process. Why? Because we're talking about folks' property, pure and simple. So the zoning map is phase 2 of this project. And then the third aspect of this, which is something that's equally as important, is at the end of the day, is there that quick reference guide that says, here's John Q. Public or whoever, what's that 20-page summary, or what's that manual that says, here's how I use the new code, even for staff? And the answer to that is, that's phase 3. So we give you the how-to guide to go along with the VCR instructions at the end of the night.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
You said the zoning maps. It's a lot of our community and properties that has not been zoned for anything but R1. So are you talking about rezoning all properties, or just the ones that has been zoned different from R1 and need to be rezoned?
We'll be looking at all properties and their current zoning. We'll be looking at what's on the ground today to say, one, does this fit with the current zoning? If not, what is this more akin to at the end of the night? And are there areas that are consistent with your comprehensive plan and your land use plan that show it being something different? Saying it may be residential now, but it's supporting something else. We'd be looking at those areas as well as part of a possible rezoning. And there again, not just going ahead and changing the colors on a map. That is a full-blown public process, so people understand, here's my current zoning, here's what the land use plan says, here's what the potential zoning could be on my property and what that does.
Yeah, I didn't think we could rezone without their permission, though. I didn't think we could just rezone somebody's property.
This is gonna be a really, and I don't wanna answer my question because I don't know the answer. But I don't know if it's gonna be by line, by property, or by area, but it is an important discussion to have, because once we consolidate, if you have, let's use your R1 example, that it's called RO or something, you have to rezone, because you're gonna have a different code for that. So that's where the maps can go in place, is consolidate not only the different zonings. If there's a discussion of potential rezonings, that's something that we go through, and I don't know the answer to the question. But this will be an important exercise. Can you really answer the question?
Well, let me be brief. As they've already introduced, you got a lot of districts right now. We actually have districts that we don't even have on the zoning map, that have never been used. He's identified some of them. You also have conditional zoning districts, and you also got special use districts. And the new legislation that starts affecting us in 2021, the conditional use districts will have to be transformed into conditional zoning districts. So we got a lot of changes to be making. Matter of fact, I'm going tomorrow to Greenville to the School of Government for a workshop, just talking about that alone, and we'll cover it, and he will work with us on that. But there's a lot of changes that we need to be looking, but answer your question, yes, you can go and rezone properties outside, but we do have to do the proper notification, hold some meetings with the property owners, and explain why. And I think the objective we want to do is that what we go to is better than what we have now. As is identified, you have a lot of R1 area, R1 zoning classification as a holding zoning classification. But in our land use plan, we are encouraging medium density because we want water and sewer out there. You won't get it in low density, pretty much. But if you look at this, the land use plan and the way our zoning ordinance is and the districts that we are now, are we getting what needs? And also, can we avoid having to have so many zoning changes all the time? Developers come in, first thing is they can't do it in R1.
I have a question. How do we implement this with new projects as they're coming along? Because this is not going to be completed until next year.
We're going to be very agile and very quick on our feet, and this is one of the things that Kelly and I have already started talking about is, as projects are coming in, we need to see them. So that, because they're going to be coming in under the old code. The one thing that you don't want to do is throw out that M word, which is like the 4-letter word that we won't mention, which is the last thing that you want to do. But at the same time, the realization is they're going to be coming in under the old code. As we're getting further into the code process, we're hoping that they will be implementing those aspects that would make them consistent with the new code when it's adopted.
So things should basically slow down a little while you have an opportunity to go over the new projects that are presented?
The M word, you're bordering on the M word.
I've seen, I will be honest with you.
I'm not saying to stop, but for every project that comes forward under the old, you're going to need a chance to see it first. So I'm not saying halting it, but I'm saying it's not going to be something that's going to happen as fast as it has happened.
I will tell you that we're not going to do anything that's going to slow down the town's review process. Okay? Pure and simple. I mean, when an application comes in, we've already been talking with Kelly and Danny and Michael. They're going to send us stuff. We're going to be taking a real quick look at it just to say, hey, by the way, here's, kind of that before and after view of it. But at the same time, if there's things that we can say, hey, if you're looking to do this, this is what the new code is going to do, and it's actually going to enhance what you're trying to do at the end of the day. That's one of the potentials that we always look at.
So, for example, Cedar Lakes, the issue with the one-way in, one-way out. I'm not saying that there's another project like that because I don't know that there is. How do you counter something like that?
That's dealing with the design and planning of it,
Okay.
not more than the code for first issue, because to be honest, it should have been better designed because it didn't do the connectivity properly for the adjoining property in that particular case.
Okay.
To be candid. One thing about the new change in the legislation is with 160D, the legislature now has triggered in. We go from the old code to the new code. It's going to be the developer's choice which one they want to go with. Our objective is to make the new code better than the old code. They want to go to the new code. They want to take advantage of that opportunity. But we don't want to throw too much of the baby out with the bathwater that we can't keep it flowing.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, though.
Thank you. Yeah, you guys got a lot of work cut out for you, for sure.
It's a big challenge, there's no
It's
question.
gonna be.
We're gonna be working hard this year. With all these projects, we're gonna be busy.
And with that, like I said, I'll be happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
You guys got questions, Paul?
I had one thing. It's a real small part of this, but we had a couple groups come in last time that had issues with trees being removed and this and that and the ordinances and all that stuff with it. So I went to the Arbor Day Foundation and asked them if they had specific ordinances they could send us. And I'd like to share that with you guys just to see if that's something we could implement into the UDO as we rewrite it so that we do it right the first time.
Absolutely. Any resources that the town thinks is important for us to look at, just if you can route them directly through staff will get them to us. We'll get with our internal design team, because I do have several landscape architects, certified arborists, that will be looking at these code requirements as well, and they're again looking at best management practices. So anything that you're thinking that or you're concerned about, or hey, take a look at this model ordinance, please forward.
Okay.
You know, questions, Paul? April, you got a question? Anything? Cheryl?
So you're looking at completion by March of 2021? Is that what I saw?
If the code's right,
Possibly.
and only if.
Gotcha.
Staff has signed off on it, planning board signed off on it, and you've signed off on it.
But during the process,
In our working group, we talked about asking you to participate on the planning commission first. So I think Michelle has indicated interest because of her liaison role with the planning commission. It'd probably be helpful if Jackie has time to participate in the detail work at times. And we'll probably ask for a couple planning commission members to be a part of the stakeholder group. I do see that there will be a need for us to continue our Friday morning casual meetings and probably actually have to remember back a few months what you worked on maybe on some of these, but it'll all be if your work will be done. You're not gonna see it new at time for adoption. You're gonna have spent a lot of hours on it before.
And during this process, should we run across something that's really great, and we say we should have been doing that all along, we don't have to wait for the final product. We could say we want to implement that now and change the existing code.
I think we can.
That's what we've been doing now, right?
That's what we've talked to Dave.
That's what we've been doing.
Yeah,
Okay.
we talked to Dave, Neal, and Kelly about that.
Okay.
If we get certain tranches, we go, you know what, let's get this adopted.
Yes.
We might go through an adoption period while we work on some other things and get those rolled out. If we can make the logic work for the final document.
Correct.
That's gonna be the key, is that they still all link together as we don't wanna adopt something and go, oh, we go
understand.
back and change the adopted thing, so. Your challenge will be to tell us how to do that logically and work through that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Sheila, anything else, other question? Okay, one
do-
final question, I'll have, go
And then
ahead.
I just want to know if any of the planning board members had any questions.
That's a good point. You guys was
Y'all are in the
gracious of
trenches.
coming, you guys got a question?
This time, no, sir, thank you.
Okay. Thanks for bringing that up. I have one final question.
Yes, sir.
We've heard this buzz phrase a while, form-based code.
Oh, I was waiting for that one.
Is that what this is, form-based code?
No. I will tell you that I have written traditional form-based codes. I have written straight normal codes like this. What I will ask you, and I think we even answered this question during the interview, was what is your definition of a form-based code?
I don't have one.
And unfortunately, what we see is communities come to us and say, "Hey, we want a form-based code because we saw that at a conference, and it's the end-all be-all." And we're like, "Great, what is the form-based code?" And they can't answer it. How do you implement a form-based code? Well, we don't know. Well, do you realize that if you wanted to do this, this, and this, that's typically what you're talking about with a form-based code? And they go, "Oh, well, I don't want to do that." So, long story short, we typically go more of a hybrid approach, so that there are design components built in with also the form function of the building itself. But if you go out and just typed in form-based codes, you will not be seeing that verbatim here. Form-based code principles and components, yes.
Very good. Thank you for.
And that's what the comprehensive plan calls for, not to be a full-fledged form-based code, but have the hybrid approach, as Kelly's identified.
Very good. Thanks for clearing that up. Appreciate that. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Okay, that actually gets us to the end of the agenda. I don't have to call for a motion, so I'll just ask, is there any opposition to adjourning the meeting?
Heck no.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.
Alrighty.